Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City Council Successor Agency to the Redevelopment Agency meeting of October 12, 2015. Would you please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any changes to the order of the agenda?
No changes from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Greg, any report from closed session?
There's no report from closed session tonight.
Okay, thank you. The next is council communications and announcements. These are announcements or brief items from members of the City Council regarding upcoming events in the community and correspondence that they have received. There are also comments by events and committees and programs that we have attended in between the last meeting and this meeting. They're informational in nature, and no action will be taken on these items at this time. So let us start with Matt.
Yeah, okay. Couple things. One, I just wanted to thank Bob. The only official meeting I needed to attend and could not was the airport roundtable, so he might have some update on that. One of the things I wanted to bring up, though, with the council, I don't know if we can do this with, there's 4 of us here tonight, but some of the business owners that are on Laurel Street have talked to me, and they're concerned about the situation they see with a string of properties that starts with, I think, the Plantation and goes down to Comerica Bank, which all that was owned by one person, and for some health reasons he decided to sell it. It was bought by someone who actually, I'm not going to state the name, but he's bought quite a few properties on Laurel Street. And my understanding is that person's plan is to have those businesses move out, redevelop those parcels, and then allow those people to move back in if they want to, but at twice the rent into the new space. And if that sort of thing continues, we're going to see, I'm afraid, gentrification of San Carlos, and we're going to lose a lot of businesses that the citizens of San Carlos appreciate, the family-run type small business operations. And instead we're going to see, and I think, I don't know if I'm letting the cat out of the bag or not, but I've heard rumors that this developer, one of the tenants that they would like to see is Apple in our downtown. So some may think that's a good thing, some may not. That's not my issue. My issue, though, is, and I'd like to hear from the council on this, is the idea of having a discussion here at the dais, either in a study session or however we want to do it, where we look at possible policies or things that we might be able to put in place to at least give a developer pause before they decide that they're going to kick all these businesses out and redevelop. Because, like I said, I'm afraid that if that just continues and we don't do anything, we're going to end up with a downtown that's unrecognizable to most of the people who have lived in San Carlos for many years and have relied on the services that they can get and so forth. So if there's any interest of the council for that topic, I would like to see it. Another issue that I'll just carry on if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor, and you can take them as you wish. Another issue that I've brought up before, and then I got a couple of emails on, has to do with people walking their dogs, especially in the downtown, without a pickup bag, and then their dogs defecate on the sidewalk. It gets left, it gets trampled on. It's not only unhealthy, it's unsightly, and it's just bad for business. And especially with the drought and the sidewalks getting cleaned less often with anybody washing them, this even becomes more of a problem. So the one person that wrote me had some ideas for things on things we might put in place, policies we might put in place, but that's a second issue that also I think might be worthy of our discussion here on the council.
Let's take your first issue, which was the new owner of that portion of Laurel Street, and whether or not there's anything we can do about it.
And if I may clarify, I don't think there is anything we can do about that particular situation, but the business owners that have talked to me are the ones that live in, that have their business in that same block, both down the street a little bit in the other direction and on the other side of the street. They're very concerned about their situations. And I'll just throw this in, you know, I'll grant you, some of them have accepted from their landlords month-to-month leases because their landlord's always been good to them. That's what happened in this case. They were all on month-to-month because the owner of the property was, you know, very reasonable with them over the years. But when the property sold, they had no leverage whatsoever. So they're really caught in a hard place. So.
Right. Bob, you have any feelings one way or another on it?
It's this is you know, I don't have a problem necessarily talking about it, but it's a difficult thing when you get into private property rights, and whose private property is it? You know, even the city is, you know, unfortunately had to close some businesses at the corner of San Carlos Avenue and Walnut.
Yeah.
And that wasn't easy either. And they were small businesses that had been there a long time. Although they, in my opinion, they had a long, long time to know that it was coming. This was completely separate and completely different. I don't know if there's a time frame. I think I know for workers, I think there's a 90-day. I'm not sure what it is. Is that right, Greg? I think 90 days for workers in certain situations in industries. If a company's sold, they have at least 90 days. They have to have 90 days notice, something like that. But short of something like that, I'm not sure we have
I have some ideas, but I can't discuss them tonight because it's not on the diet. That's why I want it on the diet.
I wouldn't necessarily mind talking about it, but it's a difficult issue when you get to private property rights. Whose private property is it? So, whatever the other council members want to do.
Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, just a few, Mr. Mayor, thank you. You know, this kind of issue comes up pretty frequently, and actually I am, or was for many years, a client of a couple of those businesses there, or a customer, I should say. And nobody likes change. Frankly, in the couple of businesses that I've dealt with, if they ended up having to charge me higher prices because of higher rents, I'd still be a customer. You know, this country is founded upon private property ownership and free enterprise. We're not a communist state. And the government, by design, has very limited roles and very limited abilities in terms of what we can do. If there are things that the council feels ought to be considered, it seems, and I'm not saying I necessarily feel we should spend the time on that because I'm pretty familiar with this area of the law, having talked to Greg about it quite a bit. If we really feel like we need to do something, this sounds to me like a task that I would ask the Planning Commission to look into. It's land use. It's land use and regulation thereof. It's exactly up their alley. But again, you know, if it were me, I probably wouldn't even invest that time in it because they have other things to do, and I think it's pretty well established the limits of what our power are.
I'm not very happy with, you know, some of the things I hear that may happen. My wife has her nails done at one of those stores. I certainly don't want to see that go away, but it's difficult to tell people who buy property what to do with it. Maybe it is something Planning Commission ought to look at, and maybe review zoning regulations or use regulations. Maybe that's the way to go. I don't know how much or how productive that would be. We might end up making some statements that are going to have no weight at all. You know, this may be something that maybe we can talk about later. It's not something I'm really prepared to agendize at this point. It's not something that I don't think that we could have much success with. So I'm personally not inclined to do it at this time. Okay. The other issue, dogs on Laurel Street. I'm sure we've all gotten the same email. And I'm wondering if that's something maybe that if we want to direct staff to come up with some ideas as to how we might lessen the problem. I did talk about maybe doing some more street cleaning or on Laurel Street. I was surprised to find out how expensive it is, but that's maybe something we ought to look at when we look at the budget, I suppose. Is there any consensus about having a deeper discussion on that?
Mr. Mayor, my own feeling is that I did get that email, and I believe I forwarded it with some comments on to staff. That's the kind of thing I expect staff to be looking into and come back with whatever proposals are appropriate. I would, however, like to just take a moment to reiterate something I said as regards the dog park that we recently established, because I suspect that perhaps some of the increased traffic, shall we say, as a result of where the dog park is now located. To continue to have the dog park, it really depends upon people who are using it and accessing it, using it in an appropriate, responsible way. And that's not a threat. It's just that these are all alternative public uses, and I just ask everybody to remember that it's great to have a dog park. It's great to be able to walk dogs around without a lot of control on it, but it's not a right, it's a privilege. And something that we have to make sure that we adhere to. So,
Jeff, you had to chime in?
I was just going to add a couple of comments to the downtown discussion, and then I can also on the downtown dog issue as well. My next community newsletter article is actually all about this issue in the downtown, passing along some information to the community about sort of what the city can and can't do in terms of its power and its roles in regulating what happens on private property and with private property in terms of when, one commercial building changes hands and they want to do something different with it. We are working with the Economic Development Subcommittee on this issue right now, in the city attorney and myself, to explore any possible ways that we could influence what's happening downtown in terms of the turnover and rent increases. I don't know what those are really yet. We have a couple ideas as well that we're looking into. So we were going to work with the subcommittee and then get their take about whether or not there seemed like there was anything viable there, and if there was, to potentially go to the Planning Commission, but also EDAC. And then if there was, if it continued to mature, it would eventually come back to the City Council at some point if there was something there. So we do feel like it's important that the staff look at this issue and sort of vet, what ability could be added to the city's municipal code to give us a little bit more leverage in this area if it's at all possible. But as the council very eloquently stated, these are very fundamental constitutional issues in our country in terms of telling people what they can and can't do with property that they own. We all think of the downtown as our downtown, and that's a wonderful thing, and it's a real asset to this community, and it's a big part of the character of the community, but it's actually not our downtown. It belongs to individual property owners who've invested quite heavily in those buildings. The city has the ability now to control uses, to say we're not going to have hair salons in the downtown or dollar stores in the downtown or those kinds of things, gas stations in the downtown core. But you can't say, we're going to allow Chevron, but we're not going to allow a Shell station, that kind of thing. So, but we're going to look at all those issues and what some other communities have attempted to do, but it's pretty cutting edge stuff in terms of what may or may not be legal. Oh, and then on the dog issue, we're aware of those emails. We're looking at possible ways. Right now, what's really hampering us is traditionally we power wash the sidewalks downtown, but one of the things that's been restricted because of the drought is power washing sidewalks. So we've been trying to find ways to work around that to keep the downtown clean and sanitary. And we're likely going to be, in the coming months, stepping up some enforcement on dog excrement all over the community. So.
Okay. Matt, did you have another comment you want to make?
Yeah, just on since it's not going to be on the dais, at least not anytime soon, I just did want to throw out two things that had come to my mind. I don't know if either one is legal, but I'll throw it to the direction of staff, and they can throw it at EDAC if they like. But one is requiring property owners to give their tenants leases that aren't month to month, that are actually multi-year of some kind, because that would offer protection, even if it was a year, because then if something happened, they would have to allow them to at least finish out that year. And the second one is something that the state did when we had redevelopment agencies. The state required that if you're going to come in and redevelop a property and move a business owner out, that you had to offer them relocation cost and have somebody meet with them and talk to them about that and where they might go and so forth. And we could possibly look at an ordinance that says that if you're going to do this, then the city of San Carlos is requiring you to provide relocation costs to those businesses and advice on, through a real estate agent of places that they could possibly move their business. So those are two ideas.
All right. Okay. Bob?
I have no comments.
Okay.
That's it.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. You want me to? Is it my turn now? Have we gotten off that?
We're done with Matt for the moment.
For the moment, until we get back to the dogs. I attended two meetings. Number one, I'm the representative for the city on the Silicon Valley Clean Water Board, and I attended that meeting. It was somewhat uneventful in the fact that we're continuing to improve the plant and obey the state regulations to what we have to do. Tonight on our agenda, we have a possible approval of a financing agreement for another set of bonds that we have to do to continue to make the plant up to code, up to speed, and bring it into the 21st century, as Mr. Walter nods his head, correct. Sometimes people take for granted when they turn on their faucet or when they flush their toilet. Unfortunately, it's not taken for granted down there because those folks work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to make sure that it all works out. So it's a very important thing we have to do. It's not cheap, but it's something that's basic. So the second meeting I went to was, as Mr. Grocott alluded to, the Airport Land Use Committee, which is a committee that meets once a quarter, I believe. Representatives from each city in the peninsula, as well as San Francisco Airport. And we talk about airplanes and airplane noise. And this time we had approximately, I'd say 30 or 40 people come to the meeting. It was the most people. I hadn't been there in a couple of years, and it was the most people I'd ever seen at a meeting. They came from as far away as SoCal in Santa Cruz County to tell us that apparently the flight patterns out of SFO have changed, and they are 60 miles away, and yet they're hearing airplanes. It was a spirited conversation, but it was all one-sided because basically the committee has no power to change the flights of the airport. The FAA basically regulates all the airports that we have, including San Carlos's airport, and that is the body that needs to be spoken to. I only say all this because if there are folks that are concerned about perhaps things that happen at our airport, coming here we wouldn't mind listening to them or getting letters about them, but we're basically helpless in that the county basically runs it, and then the FAA sort of is topping on the county. I think I'm on the right track on both of those. Other than that, I have no report, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I don't have anything to report either, although I did want to make one other comment that I forgot to make before when we were talking about downtown businesses. Mr. Mayor, I attended, as you may remember, your dedication of the Frank Harrington Park a couple of months back. And one of the things that struck me, which I don't think I ever mentioned to you, as I was listening to your speech, which I thought was a great one, was you were talking about all of the businesses that had been in San Carlos. And I did not recognize a single one of them until you got to about the last 3 or 4. And I've lived in San Carlos for 18 years. And my point is not that we shouldn't try to necessarily look at ways to help out the members of our business community, but life has changed. And what makes up San Carlos changes over time. Because, the names you were listing, I had no idea they were there. And yet I would still say that I think I know what San Carlos is. So anyway, that's the only thing I was going to add. Thank you.
Those things were stuck in my long-term memory. I don't have much. I was on vacation. My wife and I took a real vacation for a whole week, and so I was there weren't a lot of meetings to attend. But I do want to read a portion of an email that I got today from David Bouchard, who is the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, about the Art and Wine Festival. And he just said he wanted to attend tonight's meeting, but he couldn't because he had another commitment. But he wanted to express the Chamber's appreciation of the city's support of the event. And he said he wanted us to mention that they were very appreciative of the support that they got from Public Works and Public Safety and the other city departments to make this a signature event. So this actually was the 25th Art and Wine Fair. It's been a terrific success over the years, and he says the city of San Carlos has been there with and for the Chamber the entire time. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Okay, and I don't have anything else. So do we have any other staff comments on city administrative business?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I was just going to report on one item that the council is fairly familiar with, and that has to do with the sewer construction projects that have been happening around town, and the controversy related to the material that was placed without the consent of the property owner on the what we call the Transit Village site, for lack of a better word, the vacant land along El Camino, in this instance, the piece to the north of Hawley Street. So sometime during the week of September 28th, sewer contractors working on two separate projects, the Industrial Road Parallel Sewer Project, which has been taking place and will be taking place over the next several months, be finished sometime in the spring, and the lateral project that's happening all over town. The contractor KJ Woods on the industrial project put two large piles of debris, dirt from the excavation of the old sewer main that was taken out, and broken up sections of the reinforced concrete pipe itself were placed there. They were working on a lease with Samtrans, the property owner. They never got that done, so they were not authorized to be working on that site. City stepped in because winds were high and dust was blowing into the neighborhood, so we couldn't get a hold of the contractor over the weekend. They're not allowed to work weekends. And so we sent city crews out to the site to cover the material the first weekend that it was there. We'll be recovering those costs from the contractor for our efforts on their behalf. We also are looking at imposing fines on the contractor for placing material where they were not authorized to do so. The contract requires that they have legal work sites, that they get leases with whoever, wherever, but that it's all done properly. In this case, it wasn't. The city stepped in and issued orders along with the property owner, Samtrans, to have that material removed. Most of it was removed last week. Some of the new material that was being stored there was finished being moved off the site today. So the site's clear of all that construction-related material at this point. Testing is underway of the old material that was placed on the site that was taken out of the ground. We're still waiting for those test results to come back. We have some of just one of the preliminary results I heard today on asbestos. The material was all clean. There was no asbestos found in any of the material, so that's a good outcome there. But we're still waiting on another series of tests to come back from RMA, the testing company. So at this point, we've kind of concluded working on this issue at a staff level. There's still work that needs to be done by the city attorney's office in terms of enforcement with these contractors going forward. I also heard today that KJ Woods has procured another site out at the port of Redwood City where they'll be storing their construction-related material moving forward, and that they have a lease with the port for whatever space they have there. So.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, we're going to move on now to presentations, and the first is a presentation on tree removal as part of PG&E's community pipeline safety work. And we have Bill Chang and
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I am Bill Chang, your PG&E local government relations representative. Thank you for this opportunity tonight to be here on to kind of give you almost a preview, a preliminary overview as to what we're doing in terms of community pipeline safety. This effort has been rolling through a large number of cities in southern San Mateo County already, and so I'm sure you and other council members have heard some tidbits out there from your fellow council members from other cities, as well as seen some of the media coverage out there. So we're here to give you a very high-level overview. We don't have anything specific that's specific to San Carlos because San Carlos is not on the schedule for 2015. San Carlos is right now is on the schedule for 2016, and we're still gathering some city-specific data. We won't even have the preliminaries until probably after Thanksgiving. But we're here to give you an overview of the effort and answer your questions. So. Some of the background of what this effort is really stems from what happened. Excuse me. Whoa, did I turn this up? Sorry about that.
Inadvertent.
The background of this really goes back to what happened in San Bruno after the tragedy in San Bruno. PG&E really took a hard look at itself. Really took a hard look at some of the practices that led up to San Bruno. A lot of the mistakes that were made by PG&E that led up to the incident in San Bruno. So part of what we did was we went out to other utilities in California, other industries that run pipelines in other states and even in other countries, and we started gathering best practices to institute and come up with a multi-year plan to produce the best and the most safe gas pipeline system in the country. So this multi-year plan started with a few years ago with the increase in foot and aerial patrols of the transmission lines, the entire network of transmission systems within PG&E's entire territory. Then a couple of years ago, we started the hydro testing process by which we section off or seal off a section of pipeline, fill it with water, and we overpressurize it to test the strength of the pipe itself. And then, as you know, last year we started the inline inspection process here in San Carlos and in other parts of San Mateo County, where, as you know, we insert a robotic tool inside the pipeline to examine it from the inside. So the next chapter in this multi-year plan is we took the data from the aerial and the foot patrols of our transmission network, and we overlaid our easements, and we started looking at encroachments into the easements, encroachments being structures and vegetation, trees. And the reason the trees are being looked at more closely is because if something should happen and first responder crews, whether it's a PG&E crew or public safety first responders, need access to that particular spot to address a leak, large or small, precious time is wasted or spent removing a tree first before we can access that. And that kind of came to appeared in the real world last week when there was a dig-in in the city of San Mateo, and it was just a small dig-in on a service line, but that dig-in extended to a 4-hour commitment by the fire department because tree roots were in the way of the crews accessing the spot where they needed to stop the gas flow. So gas flowed for 4 hours before they could pinch it off. So with that, I'm going to introduce my colleague here, Darren Klein, who is going to give you some of the details of the effort. And again, we don't really have any specifics on the upcoming project in San Carlos. But as you know, San Carlos has one transmission line, and that's line 147. So eventually, this work will affect basically the 147 corridor.
Good evening. So I just want to make sure that we're very clear in that we are talking about transmission lines. Transmission lines, by definition, are not necessarily based on size. That's why we like to show this picture. Transmission lines are defined by the pressure in the pipe. So that's 60 PSI or higher. When you look at the service lines that Bill's referring to, they are a lot less pressure, and they're usually made of plastic, which is...
Yes, sir. PSI?
Pounds...
That's exactly why I'm asking, because I'm sure some of these people don't know what it is.
No, I appreciate that. Pounds per square inch. And so it is the transmission lines that we are focused on and that we are talking about here. We are not talking about the service lines or distribution lines. With them being able to be made of plastic, it's a whole different ball of wax. Transmission lines need to be made of steel. Since they need to be made of steel, it has a much different issues that we have to deal with than when we have to deal with the other lines. So as we looked at them and we looked at these steel transmission lines, we noticed that we did have issues with, as we checked above the gas lines, of first responders being able to have access to the pipe. For us, as Bill said, we want to ensure that. We also have some issues with tree roots when trees are too close to the steel lines of some root interaction. One of the ways we keep the pipe safe is we wrap it in cathodic protection. Cathodic protection, it sends a low level current through it that keeps the pipe from corroding. So there are times that tree roots interact with that coating, negate it, and we end up having some corrosion on the pipe, and then we have to dig up the pipe. And as we look at this, we realize that if you were to come in and just remove every tree on this block, you would change the nature of a neighborhood overnight. That is not what we're trying to do. What we're doing when folks have started to look at the trees in San Carlos is they're looking at all these trees, and we are saying, okay, we're going to take them and put them through our integrity management system, a tree-by-tree review, and see what threat they have to the pipe. And we are determined, as we determine those things, we also want to make sure that everybody understands that if a tree is determined to be directly over the pipe and have some issue with either with roots interfering or with first responders getting access to that pipe, then we will come and meet with the city and talk about the risks that those trees bring. We want to make sure to work with everyone. We hope that if you look at something like this, maybe one or two of these trees would have an issue out of the four, and that we could figure out a solution, replace some of the trees, maybe grow some close by, or just move them away from the pipe if that's possible. But we are really in the assessing stage. We're not here we don't have the exact data that you need, because we've decided to take our time and get that data so that we can be very specific. When once we get all that data, we'll bring it to the city and we'll share it with the city on Google Earth, so you can actually see points on a map. And then we will talk to you about our replacement and restoration. We are here to replace trees. If a tree cannot go right back in, if the tree well is directly over the pipe as well and we need to work something out, we will pay to restore that area and also to put a tree somewhere else. We know that with all the different various tree ordinances all over, we want to work with you on that tree ordinance and meet that replacement ratio when it comes to the tree ordinance. So the other thing is we are doing a lot more communication than you would expect us to do. We have a transmission pipe. When we talk to some folks on private property and we show up and say we'd like to talk to you about the transmission pipe, they look at us and say, what transmission pipe? Because we have found that not everybody reads their closing documents, and when they see PG&E easement on it, they think it's the line for their stove. And we don't have easements for lines like that. It's really just for transmission. So we're making sure to have those personal one-on-one interactions, helping to explain what's going on. At the same time, we are sending letters to everyone. We have a special gas safety newsletter that we've sent out to the county, and we will send more. We also will have open houses for people to come, and we will go to them. We will go door to door. Even with trees that are in the right-of-way or trees on private property, we will talk to all of the neighbors so that they know what's going on and they know the work that we're doing. And not any of this work will be completed unless we all come to an agreement. We are not going to just show up and say we have to remove for safety. We're going to show up and say we would like to remove these for safety. These are the reasons why. Make sure that everybody understands, signs off, and moves forward. So with that being said, if you have any questions, we're here to answer questions, and we'll get the data to you as soon as we can.
Bill, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I just wanted to introduce Emily Sloan in the back, she's part of our customer impact team. And so at some point, she and her team will be meeting with individual private property owners in San Carlos.
Okay, and Mark Olbert has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, folks. Appreciate the presentation. Just as in passing, one of you mentioned that San Carlos has a single transmission line, line 147. I thought there was another high-pressure gas line that ran north and south through San Carlos.
A very small portion of line 101 touches a small portion of San Carlos, but the main transmission line through San Carlos is 147. And based for this particular work, I don't think 101 will be affected. It's going to be 147.
All right. I just wanted to thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because actually I have gotten, with all the issues we've been dealing with over the years about line 147, I have plenty of residents who are near that section of 101 who are very concerned about it as well. I think it's great that you're doing this work and that you're doing a lot of outreach and stuff, and trying to identify exactly what's there that may affect the line. With all due respect, quite honestly, I wish your predecessors had adopted the same approach to keeping track of what pipe they had actually put in the ground in our community and kept track of it. But that's, hopefully lessons are learned about that. But related to that, do we have any, and you talked about, Bill, that the next step was this tree thing that you're working on. Do we have any idea of when the pigging of line 147 is going to be completed and the data is going to be available to the city?
That I don't have any specifics for. My last recollection of that was the CPUC asked the city for some comments and some statements regarding the proposed plan, and that's the last information that I do have.
All right. Well, I will talk to them about it. And I'm not trying to suggest that you can't walk and chew gum at the same time, but in all honesty, that issue is probably of much higher priority to people in San Carlos than the admittedly important thing of understanding what trees may be affecting the line.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have a presentation of a proclamation to the Edgewood Center for Children and Families for 15 years of community service. And I'm going to come around. I think we got a microphone there. You don't. Okay. Well, I'll just talk in the microphone. We have a representative or representatives. And you are?
Monica.
Oh, we met.
Yes, we did. Nice to see you.
We can turn it? Yes, we can turn it. Wow. Okay. Who knew? Well, we've only been in here about a year. We're going to present a proclamation tonight commemorating the 15th anniversary of the Edgewood Center for Children and Families. But just as a sort of an introduction, I wanted to say just a couple of words about this organization. I will admit that until about 3 months ago, I didn't even know they existed, but I got an invitation to a lunch and sort of a meet and greet for the center, which is right here in town. And I was really impressed that this organization has been around since 1850 or 1851. And its purpose is to help kids who are at risk, in need, have various mental health issues. Who would think that 150 years ago that there were organizations such as this that were helping young people? I'm sure that the methodology was different in those days than it is today, but it just underscores that there's the need. That need never goes away. And as a parent of a child that had his issues in life, I really wish I had known about this about 15 years ago. It would have been really instrumental in all of our lives, because when a child has whatever the issues are, mental health issues, they don't just affect that child. They affect their brothers, their sisters, their parents, their grandparents, their friends, and everybody they come in contact with. So I just want to say how impressed I am that this group does what they do. They engage in group therapy, individual therapy, family therapy, multifamily therapy. I downloaded this from your website. And some of the things specifically that they address are depressive disorders, signs of aggression, high levels of anxiety, low self-esteem, unexplained sadness. We don't know what kids think sometimes, and because they just keep it to themselves. And having an organization like this, excuse me, right here in this town, I don't even know how you place a value on that. Other things, low impulse control, family conflict, disruptive classroom behaviors. This organization really treats a lot of different issues that young people face. And as I recall, you mentioned to me that it deals with kids all the way up into their mid-20s, is that right?
25.
Yeah, and a lot of social services, as far as I know, cut off when kids reach a certain age, 18 or 19. And I can't tell you how valuable that could have been to a lot of people, including myself and my family many, many years ago. So that is, I just wanted to preface that with this and congratulate Monica and thank you for coming. And please accept this proclamation with our gratitude and our congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Public speaking is my favorite. Hi, everybody. My name's Monica Hendricks. I'm the Executive Director for Edgewood Center for Children and Families. We're actually 165 years coming up, and in San Francisco and San Mateo County. So we're just a spry 15 years old in this community, having our anniversary event this Thursday. To thank the community for welcoming us so long ago. We've grown from a very small trailer in East Palo Alto 15 years ago, with one staff member and about an $80,000 grant, to a pretty high-level business right now in the community. We serve about anywhere between 2,600 and 5,000 individual youth and their families every year. We are involved in every school throughout the districts in our county, which is 23 districts. So we're working with kids in schools, in homes, at Starbucks. We're working with homeless families in their cars. We will pretty much go wherever families who've been referred to us have a need. And we love this community. We love San Carlos. We've been in that building for 10 years now, negotiating leases right now, getting pushed out as well. So I have a hot button for that. But eternally thankful for the community that's allowed us to serve it, and plan to be here a lot longer. So thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
All right. All right, next we're going to move on to public comment. And let me just get my little cheat sheet out here. Here we go. Persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda may do so at this time. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. If an item you're speaking on is not listed on the agenda, please be advised that the City Council may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as are allowed under the Brown Act. The City Council's general policy is to refer items to staff for attention or have the matter placed on a future City Council agenda for a more comprehensive action or report and formal public discussion and input at that time. Okay, we will start with the first card I have is Helen Mikowitz. Did I get that right? No. I apologize.
It's Mickiewicz.
Mickiewicz.
Yeah, it's close enough. I have, oh wait, my timer. Sorry, I don't want to go over. Excuse me just a second. Let me just go on.
I've got one here for you that's
I know, but
controlled
I
by
got to be
little
able to
lights.
watch. Okay, so I've lived in San Carlos. My husband and I have lived in San Carlos longer than the Art and Wine Fair has been going on since 1989. And we've lived in the same house, and we are here actually about, it's sort of interesting, it has to do with property use also. We are bordered by 5 different lots, and at the beginning, and we wrote a letter to the City Council, mailed it to you at the end of July, and meant to come sooner to speak about it, but this is the earliest I could get here. Back at the beginning of the year, construction began. We thought it was just somebody putting in a new patio. It turned out it was an addition going on across the fence. And we never heard about it from anybody until we saw the framing going up. That was not even finished when another house bordering on another part of the lot started work on the roof, and my husband said, oh, they're just putting a new roof on. I said, no, they're putting on a second story, and indeed, they did put on a second story. We contacted the planning department about both of these, and first we were told, oh, you don't need to be notified unless it's over 3,000 square feet or a second story. Well, then when the second story went up, we weren't notified again, and well, no, it's really not when it's the second story. It really has to do with the scope of the whole project, and so on. We came in and met with Lisa Porras. She was very nice, but she said, you need to take this up with the city council. So here's the reason I'm here. We're not trying to say people can't put additions on their houses. What we're here to say is somebody ought to tell us about it before the framing goes up. In San Francisco and a lot of other communities, you put a deck on a house, you have to notify everybody in a 3-block radius. Here, 2 houses added on next door to us. We didn't hear a thing about it. The neighbors didn't tell us. The city didn't tell us. Your policy is you only notify neighbors if the item goes to hearing, which means if it goes before the Planning Commission. I'm saying that you should have a rule that the neighbors get notified, period, and de-link that connection to it going to hearing. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Hold on. Bob?
I was just going to ask staff, when I was on the Planning Commission, I was on the RC, whatever it was, RCDC. I don't remember that. I mean, I don't remember that people weren't notified. Or maybe people were talking to people then or something. But it seems like I was out at a lot of houses at 7 o'clock in the morning, standing looking out a window trying to identify what was going to go on next door. Have we changed some of the policy for that, Jeff? Do you know? Or?
Not as far as I know. I'm going to have to talk to staff about this one.
Okay,
yeah,
all right. Because it would seem to me that the lady has a somewhat valid point.
Sure.
Of whether it's 1,000 feet or it's 100 feet or whatever, if it's in your neighborhood thing, that at least you should. Again, neighbors sometimes don't talk to neighbors, and if anyway, I'll let you handle that with staff. Thank you.
If Bob hadn't brought it up, I would, because I was on the Planning Commission right before you, and we talked about that, and I could swear we had a rule, like a 100-foot rule or something, that you had to notify people when you were going to add on or make big modifications to your home, and usually if it was going up to a second story. So, okay.
Through the chair, Mr. Mayor,
yes, Mark.
sorry, I pressed my red button, but I know you were moving on. I just wanted to ask, if the council would be willing, perhaps those rules that we have and the processes that we follow, is that something we should ask the Planning Commission to review? See whether there's any reason to change them, if in fact they're...
Well, through the chair, I think I'd like to get the information from staff what is the process, if it's changed or whatever in the last 15 years, and then I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that at all, but just let's see what...
What I'll do is I'll give you an outline in an upcoming council newsletter on the process, and then based on your take of that reading, if you want to bring up again an issue to be agendized for either Planning Commission or whatnot,
okay.
I think that would be the appropriate time to do it.
Okay. Next speaker is Walt Ranieri.
Am I on? Good. If someone could just knock if I'm getting a little...
Yeah, there's a little set of lights there. I don't know if you can see that. But
can't, that's why
I'll let you know.
Thank you.
I'll let you know when you're within about 30 seconds.
Excellent. It won't take that long.
Okay.
How much can you...
start over? Because I just robbed you of 10 seconds.
How much can you say in 120 seconds about something that's kind of tearing the community apart? But let me first start off with thanking you all for all of your efforts. They're greatly appreciated, and sometimes you don't get the appreciation that you deserve. Yep, just burned 15 seconds. So I submitted a request for an item to be placed on the next or a future City of Council meeting to discuss the dog facility that has been installed here at the City Hall Park to address issues like public health, public safety, the disturbing of the peace and the public nuisance effects which have come with, sadly, the introduction of this in this neighborhood. Attached to that request is a petition that describes some of the issues associated with it that were apparently not considered, having gone to the meeting last week of the Park and Rec Culture Commission. There were no environmental impact reports done on it. The comment was made that, well, there's been no change of use. I think there has been a change of use, and there's laws like CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, that require environmental impact reports. Attached also to that is a state-of-the-art, right now, prepared right now in 2015, dog management study and environmental impact reports, plus supplemental reports, plus reports to comments that provide a good backdrop on what is possible. Not that something like that needs to be done here.
You got about 20 seconds.
Excellent. But it provides a good local resource, and I'm going to be providing some electronic links to Jeff so that he can make it available to all of you rather than trying to sift through 4,000 pages of documents. So I look forward to the hope, and I urge you to put this item on a future agenda. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Walt. I have to confess, I didn't see there was some attachment. Did any of you get that document? Oh, it's... Okay.
You can take it home, Ron.
Yeah. All right. All right. Next is Gary Walker.
Good evening. I own a home across the street from the dog park, which, as Walt talked about, there are many of us that are considering this now a public nuisance. The neighbors on Elm Street are stressed with the incessant barking. Closed doors, air conditioning doesn't even silence it. The concentration of dogs is very, very high in this small area. Now there's even a dog obedience class in the park. Speaking for the many homeowners who live, relax, sleep at Pacific Hacienda, this is our home. So I have 3 comments. First, regarding pedestrian and traffic safety, there will be an accident involving a dog or an owner. It's just a matter of time. I don't want to see this mess. I don't want it happening to me. Second, the conditions for use rules are not being followed. The dog park was required to be well managed. It's not. It's not. The rule says dawn to dusk, but I have witnessed many dogs in the park outside the hours. On Saturday morning, early before dawn, the dogs are there. At midnight, 2 a.m. in the morning, the dogs are there. In fact, there's even a light there to help them see where to go. And now our taxes are paying to clean this park because those who use it and have promised to maintain it are not. Third, I'm concerned with the process for how this park was reviewed and approved. I've received countless notifications regarding Wheeler Plaza, but not one on this dog park, not one. City Hall Park is no longer available for the beauty and enjoyment of all, but for the use of few, the dog owners. So will the council stand with the dogs, the property or their owners, or with the tax-paying voting citizens of this great neighborhood? Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. All right, next is Sandra Neff.
Good evening, and I appreciate the time to speak with you. I've written emails to several of you, and I want to thank Councilman Opert for answering my email, Mayor Collins, thank you, and City Manager Jeff Malpe. However, tonight you know what my words are. I want to give you a visual idea of what I face in my unit at Pacific Hacienda with the barking. So I thought I would show you what I have to do in my unit, and I hope that if you lived next to the dog park, I'm sure you wouldn't want to do this. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my words, to read my emails, to answer them. I appreciate that. And to see what I have to live with. And I only have a few more years, hopefully maybe till I'm 90, but I'm pushing there, and I don't want to live my life having to wear these because of the dog barking. And it must be removed from San Carlos City Hall Park because it is a public nuisance. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sandra. Next is Dan Ping.
Thank you for your time, gentlemen, lady. As an owner at 633 Elm Street, I'm really surprised. As I understand, there was larger parts that objected to the dog park. Mostly surprised that, as our representatives, why would you think that we would be happy having a dog park in such a small lot? Not only that, I don't know of any other city hall that has a dog park next door to them. I think it's not a good image for our city hall here. I'm also in the past a dog and cat owner, so I have no objection to animals. But I just don't think that this is the right location with the heavy traffic and everything else. Even as we walked over here, there was dog droppings on the sidewalk leading up to that park. So I'm saying that I put myself in the other person's shoes a lot of times. They debate problems, and I like you gentlemen to put yourself in our shoes. Would you think that that was the right location for a dog park? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ping. Next is Paul Maginetti.
Thank you, City Council, staff. A little more than a week ago, we got our Halloween early, and it wasn't a treat. It was this, all over our neighborhood. And people were feeling ill. Some people are still feeling ill. I hope that it's just a temporary thing. We're concerned about a couple of things. The biohazard, the chemical hazard, according to the health department, that the dirt taken out of there went through 2 plumes that are contaminated with chlorinated hydrocarbons. So there's that too. And you can ask any expert you want. Highly fine particles can be inhaled deeply into the lungs, and it can be very dangerous. We tried to get a hold of anyone we could. Public Works, of course, they left a message. I called Samtrans, no return. Fire Department, they said, call the Sheriff's Office. Sheriff's Office told me to call the County Office of Emergency Services, who told me to call the Bay Area Regional Air Quality Management District. We had no response while this dust storm was going on Saturday. So we made our own call and asked people to shut their windows, stay indoors as a precaution, because we had nobody else to tell us what to do, which is a sad state. And now I see all parties running for legal cover over this. And yet that had been piling up there for over 2 weeks. And it's hard for me to believe that nobody here as a citizen didn't notice that and bring it to the attention of somebody.
Paul, your time's up.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're responsible for this culture that just pays lip service to safety. I would really like that to change.
Next is Ben Fuller.
Just an FYI, I'm not leaving until I'm done. Thank you guys for working hard last weekend. I do appreciate it. I know this is a really difficult situation, and as much as I'm upset, I'm also appreciative of our city council and our city staff for doing their best in a difficult situation. This is what I have reports from. Bloody noses, 2 cases. Sore throats, more than a dozen. First-time asthma, 1. Malaise, an entire neighborhood. Mild neurological symptoms. Myself, my hand was shaking for a few days. It's not shaking anymore. Pets are sick. Pets are breaking out in rashes. Sam's not here because his wife is sick from this same situation. Samtrans has denied in writing that they were working on a lease. So what is it? Were they working on a lease or not? Samtrans has put in writing that they told the city 2 weeks ago about this problem, and the city didn't react. So it is sort of a weird situation where no one seems to be taking responsibility. Dust is now in our neighborhood. It hasn't left yet. You guys, public servants are supposed to be protecting the public, but it seems like public servants are more protecting themselves. And we feel the city and Samtrans failed us in this case. Any fines that were generated should absolutely be donated to our tree fund. There's no way the city should profit off this. If there's money to be had, put it into our tree fund. Help improve the long-term air in the area that's been affected. Finally, we do need a system for alerting the public. We need a better way to work together should this stuff happen. These are highly toxic materials that we're excavating right now, PCBs. I'm really happy about Jeff's report that there's no asbestos. That's great news, Jeff, so thank you for looking into that. We look forward to the final results. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, man. Okay, and Dimitri Vandelos. Oh, there he is.
Hi. Yeah, I'm here to echo the concerns that Mr. Fuller and Mr. Magginetti brought up regarding the dust plume. I've noticed that after the reports had come in on the following weekday on Monday that winds were kicking up and there was like a bulldozer or tractor thing that was moving the dirt around, and it was again spreading more dust and dirt throughout the community. And the question I had, and I contacted several of you, was why are we moving this stuff without knowing what's in there? So the results aren't in. The tarp, there was a tarp, it was ripped. It wasn't covered adequately. And as Mr. Magginetti said, he was contacting several agencies, and it felt like it was a who's on first game. So someone needs to take some ownership here, and this is ultimately, I feel, a city responsibility because this is a city project. This is not the first time I've seen debris stored on that site. So I think that the contractor has been putting stuff there, and it's happened on more than one occasion. So it would be prudent to be putting public safety at the forefront, given what we know about the contaminants that exist along Industrial Road. So I was quite shocked to see that stuff was just sort of dumped. We don't know what was there. We don't know if any of that was dredging from some of the other projects where soil was dredged where we know there's PCB contamination. So I'd like to see some ownership on the part of this city to say, hey, either we messed up or we don't have enough safeguards for community safety. But this is something that I really would like to see agendized and discussed fully at a future council meeting. So I would greatly appreciate if that would occur. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dimitri. I just want to say, obviously this caught everybody off guard. We're not ignoring it. We've got staff paying attention to it. I realize there's multiple agencies involved. It's never nice to call and not get any response. But we'll get to the bottom of it. I'm sorry it happened, and it's going to take a while, but we'll get it done. All right. Matt, did you have something you
just
wanted to
a quick
comment?
question. It should have been asked when Jeff was giving his presentation, but I thought of it when these folks were talking about the situation. And that is, Jeff, you mentioned testing of the soil. What's the protocol for what gets tested? What kind of items they look for? Because my concern is that there might be something that they ought to be looking for that's not tested for, and therefore it's not reported on.
Well, typically, we're going to have to back up just a little bit and provide some explanation and some context. So public works contracts, as the council's probably aware, are interesting animals. It's not like a homeowner hiring a contractor to do a project. They're highly regulated under the law. So the city puts together plans and specifications for a project and is put out to bid, and ultimately you get the lowest responsive bidder, and they win the job. Whether they're a good contractor or a bad contractor, the city doesn't get a choice, and that's where the joke comes in terms of walking into a building or whatever public building built by the lowest bidder. That's the law that we're forced to work under. So that's how we ultimately arrive with these public works contractors who aren't local contractors. They're not from our community. They don't have a lot of stake in our community. We do our best to regulate them as much as we can, but often, and this project is no exception, often we're in conflict with our contractors and chasing them around to make them do the work appropriately. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Oftentimes, if they can cut a corner and get away with it, they will. And we're forced into the role of constantly trying to respond and chase after them. In this instance, the material, the dirt, and the old pipe that's removed, once the contractor takes possession of the site, they own it. That's their material. It's not the city's material anymore. They control it. They own it. We require that they have sites and leases to have their construction equipment, lay down equipment, to put their debris or whatever the project requires. Again, another example of where this contractor fell down. The contractor is required by the dumping facility, ultimately whatever landfill this material is shipped off to provide that facility with a testing report. As far as I know, that happened. We don't have access to that information. We've made requests. We have not been given that information by the contractor. So what we did is hire our own testing firm to go out and test the material. Under really the logic that working with Samtrans, this material was on their property and they granted us access to go onto the property to have it tested. This is not our material anymore, and that's where we're at. So I'm not sure, Jay, can you speak to the testing criteria that we asked them? I think we just asked them analysis of everything that was in the dirt and the components of the construction material that were present. So we should be getting quite a wide range.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else that wanted to speak? I don't have any other cards, but I want to make sure that I gave someone an opportunity.
There's one other issue that I thought the PG&E folks were going to address. Yeah, I turned in a card, but
Lost in the shuffle.
Sorry.
Oh, I saw
come on up, Bill.
card.
Just come on up.
Filling it out for his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick clarification on my comments earlier. I said the work will primarily be focused on line 147, and it will be. But I didn't want it to make it sound like that we're forgetting about line 101, as Mr. Olbert mentioned. There's a portion of line 101 that does touch San Carlos, and of course it's a high pressure line, and we'll be treating both lines equally in our integrity management process.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The next is the approval of the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine, will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of items 8A through 8E.
Second.
All right, and just to make a note that the minutes from the September 14th meeting have been amended and corrected based on a member of the public who found some, I guess, errors in the prior minutes. Okay. Go ahead, full roll.
Councilmember Grizzly?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson? Not present. Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 9, reports to council. We have a report on regarding security camera privacy. Is that you, Mr. Rubens?
This is my report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a result of the strategic planning process, I was asked to report on some of the ways that public agencies and municipalities in particular are dealing with the increasing numbers of security cameras on private property, as well as the dealing with security cameras that are on public property, and there are some security cameras. Actually, we're on camera right now in City Hall. So what do we do with all this data, and how does what are the rights involved in that data, and what are some of the state laws that deal with security cameras? As you can see from my report, there are a couple of statutes that are relevant that are state laws that deal with the issues of rights to privacy from security cameras. One is in the Civil Code. And the Civil Code, as you might imagine from the title, is not a criminal statute, but it's a statute that's designed to regulate conduct. Civil Code Section 1708.8, a copy of which is attached to the staff report, provides for remedies for private individuals to sue for invasion of privacy when a private security camera is placed in a way that invades a person's privacy in their homes or other private property while engaged in private, personal, or familial activity. So that means that the hypothetical security camera that may be on an adjacent piece of private property or on a private building near a residential area cannot be aimed at somebody's house where it would have the effect of invading someone's privacy in the categories that I described. There's also a recent amendment to 1708.8 that I wasn't aware of until I did my research for this memo, and that's that county councils and city attorneys have been empowered to file actions to impose civil penalties on persons who invade the privacy of others in our communities. And an interesting twist on that law is half of the proceeds of those fines go to the enforcement agency, in this case would be the City of San Carlos, and the other half to a nonprofit organization that is involved in the entertainment industry. So my research of the history of the law is I think it's designed to protect celebrities from paparazzi and people who pay others to get pictures and then subsequently publish those pictures that have celebrities engaged in private activity. That statute also, though, protects people who are not celebrities. So that is a really, in my opinion, this statutory scheme is a pretty strong deterrent because it creates not only a private cause of action for someone who feels their privacy was invaded, but it also creates a cause of action that could result in a substantial civil penalty against someone who invades privacy in an action brought by a city attorney or a county council. The county council in our area, a county council would have jurisdiction over the county areas, and as a city attorney, I would have jurisdiction to pursue those types of claims in the incorporated areas of San Carlos. The second protection in the statutes is in the penal code. And that's a statute that's been around for a while, but it does cover cameras and eavesdropping. So it involves protecting the public from someone recording a conversation or when you have an reasonable expectation of privacy. So the case law that in 2006 that kind of addressed the issue head on involved a case where an out-of-state bank was recording conversations of their California customers during customer service calls. The California Supreme Court determined that yes, California law applies even though as a company you may be based out of state, you still need to comply with California's it's basically a notice statute. You have to notify someone that you're recording them. And the Supreme Court reasoned that, hey, a business that has California customers should be bound by California law and not just the law where you actually are placing the call from. So that's, I think, a very important case that upholds California's right to protect the privacy of its residents. Now, the city attorney wouldn't prosecute that. That's a state law violation, so the district attorney would enforce that. The first stop in any kind of a complaint where someone felt that they were improperly recorded would be to make a complaint to the sheriff's department to see if an investigation would turn up a violation of law. And that area of, I'm not sure how often those are enforced, because there may be some, some issues of proof. But, if someone, from my perspective as the city attorney, under the civil code violation, if someone had, pictures or photographic evidence of a camera pointed to an area of their backyard or into a bedroom or a bathroom or something like that, that would be pretty strong evidence of a violation. And there's some data points that I would have to turn to as far as the manufacturer of the camera to see what the field of view is. If it's a tight field of view, maybe there wasn't an intention to invade someone's privacy, but those will be all fact-based and unique to each set of circumstances. Part of my research also looked into some issues that we've heard before, and the reason I covered them is because they seem closely related, and that's the images in publicly owned cameras and license plate readers and things of that nature that are not those types of technologies, and the aggregation of that data has potential privacy issues. I couldn't find any cases on it, but I did see some articles from the American Civil Liberties Union that the aggregation of the data is something that they think is as a risk to overall privacy for the public. There is one case that's not necessarily about constitutional rights to privacy, but it is a Public Records Act case. The ACLU filed a Public Records Act request against the city of Los Angeles for its license plate reader data, and both the trial court and the Court of Appeals upheld an exemption to the Public Records Act, saying that these records are investigatory records, and so they're exempt from disclosure under the Public Records Act. Unfortunately, that case, or fortunately or unfortunately, the case has been taken up to the California Supreme Court, so we don't have settled law on that, and I imagine in the next year or so we'll have some rulings by the state Supreme Court on whether the investigatory exception to public records would apply to this type of information. I think the potential there is, and it may have been a strategy by the complaining parties, that let's test this to see because if we can get license plate reader data to be a public record, no matter how voluminous and how much data there is, that it might make it impractical or infeasible to have that data. So that's yet to be seen. What's going to happen with those cases? And then the final point I touched in my report is that the local regulation I did find regarding private cameras, it was a voluntary statute that would encourage the public to share their private security camera data with police for the purposes of solving crimes. And the city of San Jose looked at that, and other cities nationwide have looked at that. And in the same article by the ACLU, they didn't have a problem with that as long as it was voluntary and the data wasn't aggregated and kept for too long. And they were directed at specific crimes after the fact, not gathering data in order to try and find out if a crime had been committed, which there's a distinction there. So that's something you might direct me to do, to look at ordinances and bring those forward to you, but I'm not really recommending it because I think there's a lot of evidence out there that in response to a crime, the public is ordinarily happy to share that kind of data with a request from the police, and the police could actually subpoena that information if there's an active case too. So there are other remedies to get that data. So that's the end of my report. If there's any, it was an interesting subject, I might add, and I'm sure there's more to it than my 2-page memo, but I think I covered some of the highlights for you.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Greg. I enjoyed reading your memo. One thing that you touched on a little bit towards the end, there is a growing proportion of our community and other communities too that are installing their own private security cameras essentially around their property, so that they are, I guess typically their field of view is looking outwards towards the public spaces, sidewalks and streets and stuff, so they're looking to detect people who may be seeking to, door knock burglaries or what have you. Any advice from your research about whether it's a problem in terms of using the information if a municipality were to help subsidize or help participate in the cost of installing those, through some kind of program where we had a matching grant program or something of some dollar amount? I'm not saying we would do that because we'd have to decide if we want to spend the money. I'm really asking what, if any, are the legal implications of that?
Well, the main issue is an issue that we've touched on before from time to time, and that's whether or not subsidizing private security cameras might be considered a gift of public funds. In order to avoid an allegation that such a program were a gift, you would need to, like we're considering later tonight, have a policy that would deal with those types of subsidies or grants, and then develop a public purpose for it. In this case, the most obvious one is the prevention of crime. I mean, that's a public purpose. There may be others. I like to make sure that all the justifications for such a program would be contained within our policy or the resolution discussing that, and it also, obviously, there's a budget issue with that, and you'd have to decide as a council how much would be an appropriate amount for such a program. But I don't see any legal impediment other than we want to make sure that we develop findings that support the public purpose for such a program.
Thank you.
Matt?
I just had one question, and that is, you provided us with the civil code. Might there be any reason at all for us to look at adopting a code that matches the civil code, simply to bring it closer to home in terms of enforcement and action by either our building department or the sheriff's department, or city staff for that matter, yourself and so forth?
Well,
I'm sorry, when I asked that question, I'm more thinking of one of the things that caused us to take a look at this was a few, or maybe it was just one, I can't remember, but somebody complaining about a neighbor's security camera, and they felt like it was looking into their property, and I ask it in terms of that.
Well, the 1708.8 provides not only a private cause of action, so that resident that had that complaint actually could bring their own action for invasion of privacy, and there are substantial penalties that a private person can receive under that should they prevail. But there also is that city attorney ability which I wasn't aware of until I reviewed this. So I think that city attorney enforcement power for a well-documented invasion of privacy case may be sufficient, if you will, as a deterrent to the public. If they get a warning letter from me that, hey, your camera is pointed in the wrong direction and it's potential invasion of privacy, and look at the civil code section from state law, and it says that I have the power to enforce it and seek penalties up to $50,000, that's a fairly strong deterrent. Whereas in a municipal code section, it would be redundant in some ways, but you could mirror some of the other provisions, but we can only do a misdemeanor violation, and because it's a criminal standard, it's harder to prove than the civil penalty. So I'm not saying that we couldn't do it. It's just a matter of is it something that we think we need in addition to the state law protections?
So a follow-up question, because from what you said, it might be, if you feared that somebody's security camera was looking into your property, it seems to me like from what you said, it's a little difficult to prove that necessarily. I mean, you can take a picture and say, well, and provide vectors and whatever to show that, but to head all of that off, and I'm not saying the council would want to necessarily do this, but the thought comes to mind of just having a city ordinance that requires, if you're going to install one of these, that it go through the building department, so that we allow somebody, a building official, to go out and take a look at it, see what it's doing, where is it looking, and not that somebody can't change that, but at least that gives precautionary measure, and ostensibly the person has agreed, I've installed it, this is where it's looking at, it's been approved by the city, so forth and so on. That's something we could...
I mean, on the abstract, Councilmember Grocott, I think that's something that we may be able to look at some of our building codes to see if a permit is required for some of the electrical wiring or something of that nature. I have a feeling that some of these systems now with wireless and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi enabled, it's just a screw into the wall of the house or under the eave or something, and so I'm wondering, what would we be attaching it to? But I'd be glad to look into that as well. I didn't see any ordinances that talked about that. I mean, I did a pretty comprehensive search looking for ordinances that regulated security cameras, and I really just didn't find any. So.
All right, thank you.
All right. Is there any desire on the part of the council to give Greg further direction? No. Oh. All right. Okay. In the interest of some of our members in the audience, I'd like to propose that we just switch 10A and 10B, because I know some people have been waiting a long time. So if we could, if nobody has any objection, we're now going to move to 10B, which is discussion of establishing a grant policy and adopting a resolution approving City of San Carlos grant policy. And I guess it's Rebecca. Hope I didn't surprise you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Before you tonight is a draft grant policy for your review, discussion, and approval. Although we've given grants to nonprofits in the past, there has not been a formal policy established. Initially, this program was established to provide seed money for nonprofits to get started. However, over time, the funding process has evolved, and the Council has awarded funding to established programs. A formal grant policy would document the criteria required to qualify for future funding. The item tonight is to establish the procedures, and then the total amount of funding or the budget for this program would be determined during the budget study session this spring. This program is funded from the Council's budget, so this is Council's policy subject to the terms and procedure the Council chooses to implement. Jenny Liu, our Senior Management Analyst, is here to discuss more of the details.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So the Council has awarded grant money to the following nonprofits and programs over the past few years, including Healthy Cities Tutoring, Sustainable San Mateo County, San Carlos Sister City Association, Jobs for Youth, and Penn TV. There was no formal policy, but rather funding requests were brought to the Council for consideration during the budget study session and approved at that time. There's currently no reporting required following the funding award. The purpose of establishing a grant policy is to have a methodology to determine which programs and services to fund and establish an evaluation system that assures equity in the process of funding considerations. As part of the process to draft a policy, we reviewed and surveyed other Bay Area agencies to see what they did. For example, the City of Redwood City has a community improvement grant program that grants $100 to $300 to help jumpstart neighborhood and community improvement projects and events and encourages people to get together with neighbors to plan and implement community building activities. Similarly, the City of Menlo Park has a grant for art program that is designed for organizations looking to perform in a professional grade theater. So these examples are policies that were developed for a specific purpose. It is recommended that San Carlos will establish a policy that is not specific for one purpose, but instead allows for different ideas and services that would benefit the San Carlos community. As part of the biennial budget process, Council will establish a total amount of funding for the programs. The total funding amount could vary from budget to budget depending on available funds. Staff would then announce the grant opportunity, collect the grant application, and screen the application to confirm that the minimum qualifications have been met. The minimum qualifications include proof of nonprofit status, background information, and financial reports. If criteria are met, the application will be passed to Council for review. There's a sample rating form in your packet that may need to be modified as we move forward with the implementation. Once the recommendation is made, Council then makes a determination whether to fund the agency, and if so, how much and for how long. Staff is looking to Council for direction on whether to cap the grant award per agency and whether to allow multi-year funding. The draft policy does not include a specific amount, but as an example, Council would choose to cap the award at, say, $5,000 for a nonprofit and limit funding to 1 or 2 years. If the budget for this program is limited, capping the award amount and period would open funding opportunities to other nonprofits. Alternatively, Council could choose to remove the funding amount cap and period limitation so that the Council could continue to fund nonprofits on an annual basis, as we do now with the nonprofits listed earlier. Currently, we don't require reporting following the award. The draft policy adds this requirement. In the draft policy, we are recommending quarterly reporting, but you can choose to reduce that requirement to annual. So this ends my presentation. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right. Any questions of Jenny? Bob?
Well, actually, it's not for Jenny. I think it would be for staff.
Okay. Go ahead.
Don't we give, I guess, Rebecca, don't we give other grants out for housing?
Through the housing funds we do. This is the general
That's completely
fund.
separate and has nothing to do with this.
Yeah, this is the general fund.
So couldn't or could folks who get money on that end come here?
They could apply.
Okay. So we'd have to know what those are. We'd have to be given that. Not that we couldn't do it. It just would be nice to know the information. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, staff. It was a good presentation, and I think an interesting, and I only had a few questions about the draft policy itself. One thing I want to make sure I understand what staff's recommendation is, or what your thinking is you were talking about almost like us, the council, establishing a total amount of funding and dividing it up as opposed to using a different approach. I guess I was anticipating that part of this process might also be putting out, a grant application window and sort of soliciting stuff to see what comes in to help inform where we want to set the budget, rather than sort of independently picking a budget number saying, well, this year let's spend $100,000 on grants. So how do you see that actually, the grant application process linking into the actual budget process?
Well, the way this was envisioned was that we would determine the policy, and then when we go forward in the spring for the budget study session, depending on the amount of funding available, we would set the budget for this program. So, and then once the budget is set, then the applications would be sent out and we'd open the application period.
So it would be of the notion of we set the financial parameter first, and then this process would kick in and we would go through, and ultimately out the other end comes a series of grant grants that we approve or somebody approves, the subcommittee or what have you. I'm not saying I'm opposed to that, but do you think it could work the other way, where prior to actually having the budget process, we put out a call for grants or grant proposals and solicit those and then evaluate those and, say, okay, these ones have passed the review process and therefore are potentially eligible, and use that to inform how big an amount of grant money we want to set aside that year or that budget cycle?
We could change the process. As I mentioned before, this is your policy.
Okay.
So if the council chooses to do the application period first, the intent of this is just to establish a formal policy.
Right.
Since we haven't had one in the past, it's been informal. When nonprofits solicit, they send us a letter, and then in the past we brought it forward as part of our budget hearings.
Okay. One other, for now, additional question triggered by the conversation you just had with Bob. Is there any reason why the housing grants couldn't be subject to a similar kind of policy? In other words, my recollection is the housing grant funds come from a different fund. They don't come out of the general fund. But the same rules and process could be used, or is there a reason why they can't be commingled that way?
We could apply the same process to this.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is because actually a number of the things that you've included in the policy, like evaluating the management effectiveness and no material weaknesses and the reporting obligations and stuff, I actually think would be a good idea for any grant, not necessarily ones that come out of the general fund.
And we can expand it to both.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Bob, you have another question?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I thought of another one. So, Rebecca, under what you were saying is you go to the budget process and we figured out how much we have available. And my question is, who figures out how much there's available?
When we prepare the draft budget, as we do every year, we determine if we have a surplus or a deficit.
So staff would do that?
Staff would prepare that.
But you'd have, let's say we figured out we had a surplus of $300,000. Who would then decide how much would be available for grants?
Well, my understanding would be that we would put it on the budget list for as an option, a program funding option. So just as we've done in the past, where we brought forward funding options and we've asked the council for guidance on which ones you'd like to include, this would be a program under those program options.
Okay, so basically, there might be 5 or 6 or 7 other programs. I'm just picking a number out of the air, 300,000 surplus. We'd say, okay, we're going to give 10,000 here, 50,000 there, 20,000 there to all these different programs. And for the grants, we'd say, we get to pick the number, is what you're saying?
Well, we can recommend a number based on where the numbers end up in the draft budget.
Okay.
So we can propose a number, and then council can choose to modify that.
All right. Okay. Again, I'm just trying to identify who gets to pick the number. So, we can change it, or we can make it more, or we can make it less.
Yes.
Yeah. It's, okay. It's a difficult process because I understand what Councilmember Olbert said. You could ask for, well, again, it's a two-edged sword. I do this every year because I happen to be in I'm in the midst of reviewing 300 grant requests right now at a place that I sit, I don't know, on a board that I sit on. And
I think we know who sits on the subcommittee.
Yeah, I do have some experience with this, about 20 some odd years. But point being, if we do it, and I'm just doing rhetorically, if we do it that way, there's a lot of nonprofits out there that it would, and I don't know whether we'd be swayed, or maybe we should be swayed to give more or less at the back end. I'm not sure, or I'm talking out loud now in my brain, or we should set an amount and then go back. It's almost like I don't know, I'm not sure, but I'll listen to my other council members what they have to say.
Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, Bob, after the conversation I had with staff just before you were talking to Rebecca again, I was thinking about it. For me, I've come to the conclusion that at least if we adopt something like this, I'd like to start with the approach that they talked about, which is we pick the number, and then we put out the call for grants. Yeah, because otherwise we could be getting, I thought of the same thing you did, I think, we could be getting grant requests from someplace in Paducah, Kansas,
have limits on that.
Right.
Yeah, but no, you're right. And plus it puts, well, I'm not saying we can't handle the pressure, but if 5 nonprofits want $25,000, but we only have $25,000 to give, it's a lot. It's difficult. But again, it may happen anyway because we may only have $25,000, and we may still get grants of people asking for a lot of money. So,
All right, as I remember, this thing has to serve residents of San Carlos, right? Yeah, all right. I just have one question. I noticed that historically it said we've never given more than $20,000. Is that an arbitrary figure?
Based on the financial reports, that's what we've given.
Okay. We could raise it or lower it if we wanted
For
to.
one agency,
Right.
yes.
For anyone.
For any one particular, yes.
Right.
The
Okay.
amount done in the past year has been closer to $25,000 in total.
Right. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't hit the red button fast enough. Just a very quick question procedurally. If someone like me wanted to propose that the policy be extended to also cover housing grants, how would I modify the motion that would be made? Because I think as it's written right now, I mean, do we need to rewrite it and bring it back, or?
I would suggest a separate policy for housing for the same purpose as this particular grant policy, but let's bifurcate. They're serving very different constituencies in terms of where they would be targeted, and housing money has some legal requirements that are very different than sort of this general fund grant stuff that we're talking about.
All right.
And so I might just suggest a separate policy that we can develop and bring back to you as soon as it's ready.
Thank you.
Bob,
Dennis Match, I'm
round
sorry.
3.
Just, Mr. Mayor, in the policy it says preference is given to nonprofit organizations that serve 50% or more of San Carlos residents. So it doesn't have to be 100%, just to speak to you. Okay, sorry.
Okay. All right. I don't have any speaker cards, but anybody would like to come up and make any comments or whatever? Now's your chance.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mayor and council members. Healthy Cities has been a wonderful recipient of grant funding from the City of San Carlos. As you know, Healthy Cities was originally a program of the city starting in a long time ago, 1996, until 2013, and then, or rather 2010, and then became a nonprofit at that time. And part of our ability to change and become a nonprofit was through the support of the city in relaunching as a nonprofit. Those funds have been very significant for us. I've also mentioned that one of the ways that has helped us obtain other grant funding has been through the ability to say the efforts of the support from the city, the school district, and the community going forward. So we just wanted to mention that it's a very significant part of our funding. It really helps us get other funding, and we hope that it could continue to be part of this process. I think the setting out standards for it, we write grants to other areas. The Gellert Foundation is one, and other Atkinson Foundation, other nonprofits, and certainly having criteria to meet is part of the process, and I think will be very well received by us to follow along with quarterly reporting or yearly reporting or whatever is necessary to demonstrate the need. So see no problem really with this kind of policy. I think there will be differences on nonprofits in terms of the amount of funding that I would kind of hate to be the limit be set at $5,000, but probably that will be determined by your budget numbers and what you can afford. So I would hope that it would be some stretch from that. But again, we serve over almost 350 children in our community, and this has been a significant support to us in the past. So thank you.
Thanks, Donna. Okay. Would anyone else like to speak? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion, but before I do, I have one quick question. It says there are some details here, Rebecca or Jenny, subcommittees or the full council, quarterly, non-quarterly. Do we have to identify each one of those single items on this policy, or can that be done in the future, or what we should do?
Those are some of the items where we're looking for policy direction tonight from the council.
All right. Okay.
So does that, just as a, if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So if we approve this, we get this draft in front of us, does that mean you're going to bring us a more finalized draft, or?
No, we're hoping that you can coalesce tonight on what those issues are, and we can just sort of sum it up. You're going to pass a resolution approving the policy as amended tonight. That would be the direction from council to staff. If you wanted a cap, or if you didn't want a cap, if you wanted a subcommittee or not, those just a few things that we wanted to point out to you that you might have in your thought process about how you wanted this policy of the City Council to work.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, and I don't mean to take if you want to go down through them, or I can do it.
Are you proposing some specific language?
Well, yeah, we have.
Or a specific direction? Because
right.
if you are, Mark has a comment.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if he also wants to, do you also want to amend that or add to it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I think I wanted to do the same thing that Bob was suggesting. I also wouldn't mind, it wouldn't bother me if we have our discussion to give direction for staff and they bring it back as an item to put on a consent calendar in the future. But either way, we need to give some direction.
Right.
Well, I'll take I'm trying to go through the paragraphs here. On the first page, I don't necessarily, personally, I don't see any change except for, no, the first page is pretty straightforward to me. I don't think it has any choices per se. I mean, if we want it or don't want it, but there's no real choices. Perhaps other people might find something on the first page. I don't know.
The draft. You're looking at the draft
right,
policy.
Right, the grant policy, yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have any, it's not choice-oriented, so to speak. Or
What
there may
else?
be things we want to change.
Well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you want to address this reporting calendar, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, a year?
It's not on the
or
first
is it
page,
not?
Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
I was just going to get to that. So item 3 is, I think we really need to identify whether we want the things to come back to the full City Council or, well, it's going to come back to the full City Council anyway. Do we want a council-appointed subcommittee to be like the middle of this, or do we want it all to come back to City Council? I would recommend that we have a subcommittee and then that they recommend to the City Council. But other people may have other choice.
If we, I'm fine with that. Actually, I think a number of our other structures like this use the flexible language of either the council or a council-appointed subcommittee, so future councils can decide what they want to do. The one thing I noticed in here that I did want to point out is there's language that says the council or council-appointed subcommittee determines the funding amount. Personally, I would rather the council be the one that ultimately passes on determining the funding amount. I have no problem with the subcommittee recommending it, but I don't normally like to delegate that kind of authority to a subcommittee. So that's the one thing I would tweak there. You just strike it so it says council determines the funding amount.
I mean, I'm sorry, what line are you on? I apologize.
That's line 5, I think, on page 2.
So it's
0.5?
0.5, excuse me, 0.5.
0.5? Okay, so it'd be council determines the funding amount,
Right.
number 5. On page
Take
2.
out the or council-appointed subcommittee.
Okay. So again, at number 3, are we just going to leave that open then for staff sends the recommendations to a subcommittee or city council?
I would leave that open because, and we will have to make a determination of which structure we want to use.
All right, I'm just throwing it out. Aside from administration, discuss what submission looking organization contribute. Score, council award amount, successful results, grants, limited to under 5. It says on the grant which is available, applicants are limited to receive no more than X amount of grant per fiscal year. That's wide open to me. It's an open-ended.
Yep, and again, I don't know how other people feel. Personally, that sentence I would eliminate. I mean, and gives us the maximum flexibility rather than trying to pick a dollar amount that we're somehow going to stick with every
So
year.
eliminate the 4th line in item 5?
Correct.
Okay. Number 6, applicants notify third party. I would think it's an annual. I don't think we need to have quarterly, or maybe semi-annual, but to me, annual would be.
Annual is fine with me. I mean, a lot of these organizations, particularly if we're trying to help something start, I mean, the last thing they're geared up to do is to do quarterly financial reporting.
And I'm not trying to ram this through my other council members. If you guys, have another line, just pipe up. So okay, annually, I think would be every year or whatever the word is that we need to put in there.
Annual reports.
Staff.
Remember, that's a lot more work for staff too if they've got to read four reports
so it's once
a year.
Staff processes the grants. Applicant must reapply annually grants for grants unless there's awards multi-grant. I don't personally, number 8. I don't think we should ever do multi-year grant funding because we don't know what our budget's going to be next year.
I agree.
Must apply annually for grants. Just eliminate from
the last part of it.
unless on.
Yep.
Must apply annually for grants.
Yep.
Okay, is there any other changes that anyone has? Mr. Grover?
Are there any other issues that staff knows that we haven't?
Or something that staff sees? Go ahead, Matt.
The only thing that I would, the annual reporting is a little bit open-ended, but I could see that as, I mean, I don't want to micromanage it, but my biggest concern is this issue of serving San Carlos residents. And so just to be noted that I think in the annual reporting that needs to be in there as part of how many how many residents they know that they served.
So financial and the number of residents served. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Fine.
Yeah.
Good idea.
How would you word that?
Oh, they'll figure it out.
All right.
We'll draft something.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
So if hearing no other adjustments, I would move to adopt Resolution 2015-113,
113.
a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos adopting the City of San Carlos grant policy with the changes that we just made.
Second.
All right.
And just as so what was said before about it coming back to us, it'll be on the consent calendar or not?
It actually doesn't
show up again.
Actually doesn't need to. If you're comfortable with the changes you've made tonight, you're adopting the policy. But if you want to, as part of that motion, give us direction to put it on the consent calendar just for a readoption in the future, we're happy to do that too. Your nickel.
My nickel says we don't have to, but
I'm fine just adopting it, and we will get copies of it because staff is very good at providing it. And if you've done something that we disagree with, we'll probably let you know.
Or you'll let us know.
All right. Any other discussion? Yvette?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson, not present. Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mayor Collins?
Yes. Okay. Moving back to item 10A.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Jenny.
This is consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing execution and delivery of a financing agreement with Silicon Valley Clean Water relating to 2015 wastewater revenue bonds, advanced refunding outstanding debt from 2008 and 2009, and approving related documents and official actions. Mr. Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. Jay Walter, Public Works Director, here tonight for the Silicon Valley Clean Water 2015 bond needs. And again, our hope tonight is that you'll be ready to adopt a resolution that will approve a financing agreement for the 2015 issuance of these revenue bonds. So just some background information for the council and for the members at home who are watching. The city's wastewater collection system serves our population of 29,000 people, residents and businesses, about 1,100 sewer accounts, 90% of those residential, and we operate our own wastewater collection system, about 105 miles of sewer pipelines and 6 pump stations. We convey that wastewater to the, look at that, I forgot to change the name from last year, to Silicon Valley Clean Water's regional plant for treatment and disposal to San Francisco Bay. I apologize, Matt. You'll not tell Dan that. In the audience tonight, I should mention that Matt Anderson, the CFO for Silicon Valley Clean Water, is here. Alex Handlers from Bartle Wells, who's been our financial consultant on sewer rate studies for the past several years, is here as well. And Rebecca Mendenhall, too, our Administrative Services Director. The city is a member of a joint powers agency with Redwood City, Belmont, and West Bay Sanitary District that all together fund the maintenance and capital needs of the wastewater plant. So the Silicon Valley Clean Water Capital Improvement Program, currently programmed at around $775 million over 10 years. The capital project construction is progressing a little more slowly than we had kind of explained to the council at previous bond items and at our sewer rate study. But they are moving forward with their capital work, and they expect to increase the amount of capital work that they put out to bid in 2015 and 16. Silicon Valley Clean Water has taken steps to prepare for the bond sale of $40 million, and we're looking for the financing for the program and so they can begin construction. So they need approval of the finance agreement from San Carlos and other JPA members to proceed. The financing agreement is required by the JPA whenever the Silicon Valley Clean Water plant determines a need for bond financing. And as a part of your package, the financing agreement is in draft form until the issuance of the bonds. And the San Carlos repayment obligation under the agreement is 15.14% of the bond proceeds. We don't have any responsibility for any of the other bond proceeds from the other agencies for paying that. There's no cross-collateralization, and so we are only responsible for that portion that is San Carlos. The San Carlos Sewer Utility, we're a financially self-supporting enterprise fund. The rates need to be adequate to fund the cost of providing our services, including operating capital needs, and we need to be able to provide for the Silicon Valley clean water needs. In 2013, the city approved a 3-year series of rate increases that include the funding for the Silicon Valley Clean Water Capital Project's debt service. And as I mentioned before, because the progress of their capital program has been slow, the rates that we have currently in place will cover the cost of the debt service of these 2015 bonds. And the city's share of that capital program is about 15%. The sewer financing, this is a bond issuance from previous and line of credits that have been used, and again in moving forward, they're planning on using state revolving fund loans and the 2015 bond issuance. And they have almost exhausted their line of credit at this point in time, and so that's the real urgency for approving the financing agreement and getting out with the bonds. So the next steps, actually we've already entertained rating agencies out at Silicon Valley Clean Water Plant, and we were in attendance there. The final bond documents will be prepared, and the bonds will go on sale actually in probably late October, early November. And the first payment, not sure why that says question mark, but that'll actually be probably early 2016. And for the city, we'll have debt service payments of just over $400,000 annually going forward for these 2015 bonds. Okay, so the recommendation tonight to approve the financing agreement for the 2015 wastewater revenue bonds and related documents. And as I mentioned before, if there's questions, Silicon Valley Clean Water staff is here, and city staff is here as well for whatever questions council may have.
All right, thanks, Jay. Mark, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Jay. And actually, Bob, feel free to chime in, because I know that you know this stuff backwards, some of these things backwards and forwards better than probably staff does. In terms of issuing the bonds, does the agency have to have 100% approval of the co-owners, or is it just over 75% or some lower threshold?
I believe it's 75%, but the way it's set up is we need, well, you know, that's a good question. I'm not sure if even city staff or attorney knows that answer, but the way it works is, I think,
we have Alex
to talk to you about why don't you bail me out of this?
One moment.
Yeah, the way it works at the authority level, to approve stuff, they need that 75% vote. Redwood City and West Bay can veto any bonds at the authority level because they have enough votes there. San Carlos cannot. Their vote share is not high enough. So That's why San Carlos has to adopt its own separate financing agreement, so it puts the authority back in your hands to allow the bonds to go forth.
That was actually my next question. So basically, we sort of have to go along with this, but we can't control.
We don't have to go along with it if we have cash.
Right, we have to pay for it some other way.
Belmont has, I think, in the past has financed their own thing through their own machinations. I don't know, they print money in the basement. I don't know how they do it. But I think this time they're going to actually be with us in the bond. Is that, no?
Not this time, but possibly in the
Next
future.
time. So they have a separate way that they do it.
Okay. Next question I had is, given that most people think rates are at rather unusually low levels, is the agency looking at trying to borrow as much money as it needs sooner rather than later in the expectation that rates are likely to go up?
There's actually been quite a bit of discussion at the board level over that, and one of the agencies in particular was very concerned about borrowing money before it was needed. So I think the agency has kind of tuned its approach to be able to utilize the existing line of credit that they have as much as possible, and then go for the bond sale when it is really ready to begin spending that money.
That actually that can work out well, but when you absolutely need the money is not necessarily when the financial markets happen to bid up or bid down rates. So I'm not on the board, but I hope that's being aggressively debated, because that could easily end up locking us into a very expensive or a more expensive transaction than it needs to be.
It has been aggressively debated, to say the least, especially from three of us. But there is as Alex indicated,
there's one person
who
no.
has the veto, thing, and that's the issue. And so we've tried to come to an accommodation, and as we go, because no one can predict interest rates, and especially now that there was quite a debate on this one, and at one point this wasn't going to happen, and I just was aghast, saying, how can you possibly know, just like you said, whether it's going to go up or down? So we've tried to, with Matt's help, we've tried to, fine line this thing, but there's no way you could beat the system. And, if you can get cheap money, in the past in my life, I thought it's a great idea, but having said that, the ratepayers then have to pay for it. And that's when one of the members has constantly beat on us of the ratepayers have to pay, and why should they pay ahead of time, and da-da-da-da. But it has been aggressively debated.
I have some ideas that I'll talk to you about offline. And they don't involve anything with, involving fish or anything like that. That actually answers my other question about the delay in issuance that I had heard about. Lastly, and I'm asking this just as a general question because it's definitely related to an approval of a bond measure, but it's broader than that. In general, Jay, with the rate changes that we adopted a few years ago, and given what's happened with delays in construction and timing of financing and whatnot, are we still more or less okay with the rates that we've set, or are we already anticipating that there's an issue that we know we're going to have to address?
No, actually, after having this conversation with Alex, we've kind of reasoned out that if we were to go forward in 2016, we don't have to raise rates now in order to be able to afford this debt financing for Silicon Valley Clean Water. So we're relatively safe for this year. But we are going to be looking at the rates again, and we'll bring forward that rate study analysis in the spring to council so that we can give you the best outlook going forward, 5 years, 10 years, so you can get a sense of where we think the rates need to go.
I appreciate you doing that, and I look forward to that. No construction project ever gets completed on time, but one of the risks is whenever things get delayed. It's a funny thing about life, costs never go down in construction. They do with computers and electronics, but they never go down with construction. So
only in a recession when contractors are super hungry for work.
Fair enough. So
that's our experience.
I'll just tube the national economy, and then we'll be okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Yeah. Matt?
So there was a lot of questions or discussion there about the rates, but when I read through this, I didn't see anything on the rate.
The
rate. Is that because it's not known, or? It's in there and I'm not seeing it?
Quite known yet because the bonds haven't gone to market. Everything's prepared, and on the date of pricing, the bonds will be marketed and the rate will be set. That said, rates are pretty favorable right now. We're looking at, an average rate of, I'm forgetting, a little over 4% for a 30-year financing. But the specific rate will be determined. And they're also looking at taking advantage of the low rates now to possibly refund 2 of the prior outstanding issues for savings, if the savings is there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak on this? All right, seeing none.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt Resolution 2015-114, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing execution and delivery of a financing agreement with Silicon Valley Clean Water relating to 2015 wastewater revenue bonds, advance refunding of outstanding debt from 2008 and 2009, and approving related documents and official actions.
Second.
All right, motion and second. Any other discussion? Yvette?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson, not present. Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. Okay, moving on to our final item, 10C. This is consideration of appointments to City Council Ad Hoc Transit Shuttle Committee for 2015. All right.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to appoint Mark Olbert and Cameron Johnson as the City Council representatives to the city's Ad Hoc Transit Shuttle Committee.
All right. Matt, do you want a second? Otherwise, I'm happy to do it. Okay.
Can I make a friendly amendment? Sure. That Vice Mayor Johnson has to do all the paperwork? No, we'll strike that.
Let's strike that. Yeah, good idea. All right, any other discussion? Okay. Yvette?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson, not present. Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Collins?
Yes. And with that, I believe we are adjourned.